In the countless days that Judge Frank Caprio has presided over Providence Municipal Court, he has encountered every type of defendant imaginable, from apologetic first-time offenders to repeat violators, from people facing genuine hardship to those simply trying to avoid responsibility. But on this particular Thursday morning in late September, something unprecedented was about to happen in his courtroom. A visitor would appear who had never been there before, someone whose presence would challenge every assumption about how justice works and whose simple words would leave everyone present questioning what they thought they knew about right and wrong. The morning had started like any other, with Judge Caprio reviewing his docket and preparing for the usual parade of traffic violations, parking disputes, and minor municipal infractions. His clerk, Patricia, was organizing files with her characteristic efficiency. The bailiff was ensuring courtroom security, and the first defendants of the day were taking their seats in the gallery, most of them looking nervous or resigned to whatever fate awaited them. But at exactly 9:15, just as Judge Caprio was about to call his first case, the courtroom doors opened and in walked a small figure that immediately commanded everyone's attention. It was a little boy, no more than 7 years old, dressed in his best clothes, a button-down shirt that was slightly too big for him, navy blue pants that had been carefully pressed, and sneakers that had been scrubbed clean for this important occasion. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he carried himself with the kind of serious purpose that only children possess when they're on a mission they consider absolutely vital. The boy's name was Miguel Santos, and he walked down the center aisle of the courtroom with the determined stride of someone who had thought carefully about what he needed to do and was committed to seeing it through, regardless of how intimidating the environment might be. Behind him, at a respectful distance, walked his grandmother, Rosa Santos, a woman in her 60s whose face showed both pride in her grandson's courage and deep anxiety about what was about to unfold. Judge Caprio immediately noticed that something unusual was happening. Children occasionally appeared in his courtroom, but always as observers accompanying adult defendants, never as active participants in the proceedings. Miguel, however, approached the front of the courtroom with clear intent, stopping directly in front of the defendant's stand and looking up at Judge Caprio with the kind of direct, honest gaze that only children can maintain when they have something important to say. "Excuse me, Mr. Judge," Miguel said, his voice clear but respectful, using the formal address that his grandmother had taught him for speaking to authority figures. "My name is Miguel Santos, and I'm 7 years old, and I need to talk to you about something very important that happened to my daddy." The simplicity and directness of his introduction created an immediate hush in the courtroom. As everyone present realized, they were witnessing something completely outside the normal bounds of legal proceedings. Judge Caprio leaned forward in his chair, his experienced instincts telling him that whatever was about to unfold would require his full attention and probably his most careful consideration. In 30 years on the bench, he had learned to read people quickly, and everything about Miguel's demeanor suggested a child who was not acting on a whim, but who had been driven to this moment by circumstances that mattered deeply to him. "Hello, Miguel," Judge Caprio said gently, his voice taking on the warm tone he reserved for the rare occasions when children found their way into his courtroom. "I can see that you have something important on your mind. Before we talk about your daddy, can you tell me who brought you here today?" The question was both practical — Judge Caprio needed to understand the adult supervision situation — and procedural, as he tried to determine how to handle this unprecedented situation within the bounds of proper courtroom protocol. Miguel turned, slightly to gesture toward his grandmother, who had taken a seat in the front row and was watching the proceedings with a mixture of love and apprehension. "That's my abuela Rosa," Miguel explained, using the Spanish word for grandmother that felt more natural to him than the English equivalent. "She brought me here because I asked her to, because I need to fix something that happened to my daddy, and I think you're the only person who can help me." Judge Caprio could see the deep bond between Miguel and his grandmother in the way the boy looked to her for reassurance, and the way she nodded encouragingly, despite her obvious nervousness about the situation. Rosa Santos had clearly made the difficult decision to honor her grandson's request to come to court, even though she probably had serious doubts about the wisdom of bringing a 7-year-old child into legal proceedings. "Miguel," Judge Caprio said, his curiosity now fully engaged, "can you tell me what happened to your daddy that you think I might be able to help with?" The question opened the door to what would become one of the most moving and unexpected testimonies ever heard in Providence Municipal Court, as Miguel began to unfold a story that would challenge everyone present to think differently about justice, family, and the sometimes tragic consequences of well-intentioned actions. Miguel took a deep breath, gathering his courage for what was clearly a difficult topic for him to discuss. "My daddy got a ticket from a police officer for not having a license to drive," he began, his words carrying the careful precision of someone who had practiced this explanation many times. "But my daddy wasn't doing anything bad. He was just trying to take care of me and my little sister when we really needed help." Judge Caprio felt his attention sharpen as Miguel began to describe what sounded like a driving without a license citation, one of the most common violations that appeared in his courtroom. But the context that Miguel was providing, a father trying to care for his children, suggested that there might be more to this story than a simple case of someone ignoring legal requirements. "Can you tell me more about what happened that day?" "Miguel?" Judge Caprio asked gently, understanding that getting the full story from a 7-year-old would require patience and careful questioning. "What kind of help did you and your sister need?" The question encouraged Miguel to provide more details while staying focused on the specific incident that had brought his family into contact with the legal system. Miguel's face grew more serious as he prepared to describe what was clearly a traumatic memory for him. "My little sister Sophia got really sick in the middle of the night," he began, his voice taking on the worried tone that children use when discussing medical emergencies. "She was throwing up and crying, and her skin felt really hot. And Mama was scared because Sophia is only 3 years old, and sometimes when little kids get that sick, they have to go to the hospital right away." Judge Caprio could already see where Miguel's story was heading, and he felt his heart beginning to constrict as he imagined the family crisis that had led to the traffic violation. Emergency situations involving young children often created the kind of desperate circumstances that forced otherwise law-abiding people to make choices they wouldn't normally consider. "Mama doesn't know how to drive," Miguel continued, providing crucial context that explained why his father had been behind the wheel despite not having a valid license. "She never learned because in the country where she was born, ladies didn't usually drive cars, and since we moved to America, she's been too scared to learn because the cars here go really fast and she's afraid she might have an accident." The immigration background that Miguel casually mentioned added another layer of complexity to his family's situation. Judge Caprio understood that many immigrant families faced unique challenges related to cultural differences, language barriers, and unfamiliarity with American systems and requirements, all of which could contribute to legal difficulties, even for people who were trying their best to comply with the law. As Miguel continued his story, Judge Caprio found himself completely absorbed in the child's narrative, struck by both the innocence of his perspective and the mature way he was handling a clearly difficult and emotional topic. The courtroom had fallen completely silent, with everyone present hanging on every word of this 7-year-old boy's testimony about a family crisis that had led to legal troubles none of them could have anticipated. That night when Sophia got sick, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, Miguel continued, his voice taking on the careful cadence of someone recounting a traumatic memory. "I woke up because I heard Sophia crying really loud, which was different from her normal crying when she has bad dreams. This crying sounded scared and hurt, and it made my stomach feel funny because I knew something was really wrong." Judge Caprio could picture the scene, a 7-year-old boy being awakened in the middle of the night by the sound of his little sister in distress, the immediate awareness that children have when something in their safe world has gone wrong. The detail about Miguel's physical reaction to his sister's crying revealed the deep bond between the siblings and the way that children's bodies respond to stress even when they don't fully understand what's happening. I got out of bed and went to Mom and Daddy's room, and I saw Mama holding Sophia, and both of them were crying, Miguel said, his own voice beginning to waver as he relived the frightening experience. Sophia's face was all red and sweaty, and when Mama touched her forehead, she said, "Dios mío, está muy caliente," which means, "Oh my God, she's very hot" in Spanish. Mama only speaks Spanish when she's really scared or really worried. The linguistic detail that Miguel provided revealed something important about his family's emotional dynamics. The way that stress and fear could cause his mother to revert to her native language, suggesting both her immigrant background and the depth of her panic about her daughter's condition. Judge Caprio understood that for many bilingual families, language switching often indicated the intensity of emotional states. Daddy was trying to calm Mama down and figure out what to do, Miguel continued, painting a picture of a father attempting to manage a medical crisis while supporting a terrified wife and maintaining some semblance of control for his frightened children. He was asking Mama questions about how long Sophia had been sick and what her temperature was, but Mama was too scared to answer clearly because Sophia kept throwing up and making these little moaning sounds that didn't sound like my little sister at all. Judge Caprio felt his own anxiety rising as Miguel described the escalating medical emergency. The image of parents struggling to assess their toddler's condition in the middle of the night, with limited medical knowledge and growing panic, was something that any parent could relate to and fear. The helplessness and urgency of such situations often led to exactly the kind of desperate decision-making that brought families into legal trouble. Daddy said we needed to take Sophia to the hospital right away because little kids can get really sick really fast and we couldn't wait until morning to see if she got better, Miguel explained, revealing his father's responsible decision to seek immediate medical attention despite the complications it would create. But that's when we had a big problem, because Mama was too scared and shaky to drive, and Daddy's license got taken away by the police a few months ago. The revelation about Miguel's father's suspended license provided crucial context for understanding how the family had ended up in legal trouble. Judge Caprio realized that this wasn't a case of someone carelessly disregarding licensing requirements, but rather a situation where a father with a suspended license had been forced to choose between legal compliance and his daughter's immediate medical needs. I asked Daddy why the police took his license away, and he explained it to me in a way that I could understand, Miguel said, demonstrating the open communication that existed in his family despite the serious nature of their problems. Daddy said that he had gotten some tickets for driving too fast and for not having insurance on our car, and when he couldn't pay all the money for the tickets, the judge said he couldn't drive anymore until he paid everything and took some classes about safe driving. Judge Caprio recognized the familiar pattern that Miguel was describing, the cascade of financial and legal problems that often trapped working-class families in cycles of violations and penalties. Traffic tickets led to fines, unpaid fines, led to license suspension, and license suspension created exactly the kind of impossible situations that Miguel's family had faced during their medical emergency. Daddy told Mama that he was going to have to drive Sophia to the hospital even though he wasn't supposed to, because calling an ambulance costs too much money and we don't have enough money for that, Miguel continued, revealing the cruel economic calculations that his family had been forced to make during a medical crisis. Daddy said that keeping Sophia safe was more important than the rules about driving, and that he would deal with whatever happened later. The moral reasoning that Miguel attributed to his father impressed Judge Caprio with its clarity and selflessness. Here was a man who understood the legal consequences of driving with a suspended license, but who had made the conscious decision that his daughter's health and safety outweighed those consequences. It was exactly the kind of impossible choice that loving parents faced when systems failed to account for emergency situations. So Daddy picked up Sophia, who was still crying and felt really hot, and Mama got dressed really fast and grabbed Sophia's favorite blanket, Miguel said, his narrative taking on the rushed, urgent quality of the night he was describing. I wanted to come too because I was scared about Sophia and I didn't want to stay home by myself. But Daddy said I needed to stay and be brave and take care of the house until they came back. The responsibility that had been placed on Miguel's 7-year-old shoulders was heartbreaking to Judge Caprio. Here was a child who had been asked to be the man of the house during a family crisis, to manage his own fear and worry while his parents dealt with his sister's medical emergency. The trust that his father had placed in him spoke to both necessity and Miguel's apparent maturity, but it also highlighted the impossible choices that families in crisis often had to make. Before they left, Daddy knelt down and looked at me very seriously and said that if anyone asked where he went, I should tell them the truth, that he took Sophia to the hospital because she was very sick and needed a doctor, Miguel explained, revealing his father's commitment to honesty and accountability, even in the midst of an emergency situation. Daddy said that telling the truth is always the right thing to do, even when the truth might get you in trouble. The moral lesson that Miguel's father had imparted in that moment of crisis revealed the values that guided their family's decision-making. Judge Caprio was struck by the fact that even while making the difficult choice to drive with a suspended license, Miguel's father had emphasized the importance of honesty and taking responsibility for one's actions. They were gone for a really long time, Miguel continued, his voice taking on the lonely, worried tone of a child who had spent hours not knowing whether his little sister was going to be okay. I tried to stay awake and wait for them, but I fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up in the morning, Mama and Daddy were back and Sophia was sleeping in her bed, and she looked much better than she did when they left. The relief in Miguel's voice as he described his sister's recovery was palpable, and Judge Caprio could imagine the joy and gratitude that the family had felt when the medical crisis had passed. But Miguel's story was clearly far from over, and Judge Caprio sensed that the legal consequences of that desperate midnight drive were about to be revealed. But when Daddy came back from taking Sophia to the hospital, he told me that he had gotten a ticket from a police officer, Miguel said, his voice taking on a tone of confusion and sadness. The police officer was nice, Daddy said, and he understood that Daddy was trying to help Sophia. But the officer still had to give Daddy a ticket because the law says you can't drive without a license, even if you're trying to save someone. As Miguel continued his story about the police officer and the ticket, Judge Caprio could see the confusion and frustration in the little boy's eyes, the struggle that children face when they encounter situations where doing the right thing and following the rules seem to be in conflict with each other. Miguel's innocent perspective was revealing truths about the justice system that adults often overlooked or accepted as unavoidable complications of law enforcement. I didn't understand why Daddy got a ticket for saving Sophia, Miguel said, his voice carrying the genuine bewilderment of a child trying to make sense of adult logic. I asked Daddy if the police officer was mad at him for helping Sophia, and Daddy explained that the police officer wasn't mad at all. The officer said he was sorry that our family had to go through such a scary night, but that he still had to give Daddy a ticket because that's what the law requires him to do. Judge Caprio was struck by the maturity of the conversation that Miguel was describing between his father and the police officer. Both men had apparently handled a difficult situation with dignity and understanding, recognizing the human elements involved while still acknowledging their respective obligations. The father, to protect his child, the officer to enforce the law as written. Daddy told me that sometimes grown-up rules are complicated and that even when people are trying to do good things, they sometimes have to accept consequences for breaking rules, Miguel continued, revealing the thoughtful way his father had tried to explain the situation without undermining respect for law enforcement or legal systems. But Daddy also said that he would make the same choice again if Sophia was sick, because protecting his children is the most important job a daddy has. The moral framework that Miguel's father had provided was impressive to Judge Caprio, who could see that the man was teaching his son about both personal responsibility and the higher moral obligations that sometimes transcend legal requirements. It was exactly the kind of nuanced thinking that good parenting requires, helping children understand that laws are important while also teaching them that love and protection of family can sometimes demand difficult choices. After Daddy got the ticket, he had to go to court to talk to a judge about what happened, Miguel explained, bringing his story closer to the present moment and the reason for his appearance in Judge Caprio's courtroom. Daddy was really nervous about going to court because he was afraid the judge might be angry at him for driving without a license, even though he was just trying to help Sophia. Judge Caprio could imagine the anxiety that Miguel's father felt about appearing in court, especially knowing that he had technically violated the terms of his license suspension. The fear of harsh punishment, possible jail time, or additional financial penalties would have been overwhelming for a man who was already struggling to support his family and deal with the original violations that had led to his license suspension. The day Daddy went to court, I asked him if I could come with him to tell the judge about Sophia being sick and how Daddy saved her, Miguel said, revealing the innocent logic that had led to his presence in Judge Caprio's courtroom. But Daddy said that kids aren't usually allowed in court and that he needed to handle this problem by himself like grown-ups do. The protective instinct that Miguel's father had shown in trying to shield his son from legal proceedings was understandable, but Judge Caprio could see that Miguel had not been satisfied with being excluded from something that he clearly viewed as fundamentally unfair. The boy's desire to advocate for his father revealed both his love for his family and his inherent sense of justice. But when Daddy came home from court, he looked really sad and worried, Miguel continued, his voice taking on the concerned tone that children use when they sense that their parents are struggling with problems beyond their control. Daddy told Mama that the judge said he had to pay a really big fine and that if he got another ticket for driving without a license, he might have to go to jail. The harsh consequences that Miguel was describing revealed the rigid application of legal penalties that often failed to account for the human circumstances behind violations. Judge Caprio realized that his colleague had apparently focused solely on the technical aspects of the case without considering the emergency situation that had prompted Miguel's father to drive in violation of his license suspension. I heard Mama and Daddy talking late at night about how they were going to pay the fine, Miguel said, his words revealing the financial stress that the citation had imposed on an already struggling family. The fine was $400. Which is a lot of money for our family. Mama was crying because she said it wasn't fair that Daddy was being punished for saving Sophia's life. The amount of the fine was staggering to Judge Caprio when he considered it in the context of a working-class family's budget. $400 could represent a significant portion of the family's monthly income, money that they needed for rent, food, medical expenses, and other basic necessities. The financial penalty was essentially punishing the entire family for the father's emergency decision to prioritize his daughter's health. I started thinking about what happened and trying to understand why the judge didn't care that Daddy was being a good daddy and saving Sophia, Miguel said, his words revealing the deep thinking that had led to his decision to appear in court. I thought maybe the judge just didn't know the whole story. Or maybe nobody explained to him that Daddy isn't a bad person who breaks rules for fun. The innocent logic of Miguel's reasoning was both heartbreaking and profound. He had identified exactly what was wrong with the purely technical application of legal penalties, the failure to consider context, character, and circumstances that could transform a technical violation into an act of heroic parenting. So, I asked Abuela Rosa if she would bring me to talk to a different judge, someone who might understand that Daddy was just trying to protect our family, Miguel explained, revealing the plan that had brought him to Judge Caprio's courtroom. Abuela wasn't sure it was a good idea at first, because she said judges are very busy and important people who don't usually talk to little kids about grown-up problems. The hesitation that Miguel's grandmother had shown was completely understandable, and Judge Caprio could imagine the internal struggle she had faced between wanting to support her grandson's noble intentions and worrying about the appropriateness of bringing a child into legal proceedings. Her ultimate decision to honor Miguel's request spoke to her love for him and her recognition of the sincerity of his mission. But I kept asking Abuela to bring me here because I couldn't stop thinking about how sad and worried Daddy looked after. He went to court, Miguel continued, his voice carrying the determined love of a child who couldn't bear to see his parents suffer for doing the right thing. I know that Daddy broke a rule, but he broke it for a good reason, and I thought maybe if I explained to a judge what really happened, the judge might understand and help our family. The pure faith that Miguel had in the justice system, his belief that if he could just explain the situation clearly enough, a judge would recognize the unfairness of punishing his father for saving his sister, was both inspiring and heartbreaking to Judge Caprio. The boy's trust in the fundamental fairness of legal institutions represented exactly the kind of idealism that the system should strive to live up to. "I've been practicing what I wanted to say to you, Mr. Judge," Miguel said, looking directly at Judge Caprio with the serious expression of someone who had prepared carefully for an important presentation. "I wanted to make sure I could explain everything clearly so you would understand that my daddy is a good man who loves his family and only broke the rule because he had to save Sophia." The preparation that Miguel had put into his court appearance revealed the depth of his commitment to advocating for his father. Judge Caprio could imagine this 7-year-old boy rehearsing his testimony, thinking carefully about how to present the facts in a way that would help a judge understand the moral complexity of his father's situation. Judge Caprio found himself completely mesmerized by Miguel's earnest testimony, but he could sense that the 7-year-old was building toward something specific, a request or plea that had motivated him to overcome his natural childhood fear of authority figures and speak up for his father in this intimidating setting. The judge leaned forward slightly, giving Miguel his complete attention as the boy prepared to make the appeal that had brought him to court. "Mr. Judge," Miguel said, his voice taking on the solemn tone of someone about to make a very important request, "I want to ask you if there's anything you can do to help my daddy with the big fine he has to pay, not because I think he shouldn't have consequences for breaking the rule, but because I think maybe the consequence should be different when someone breaks a rule to save their little girl." The sophistication of Miguel's moral reasoning astounded Judge Caprio. This 7-year-old boy wasn't asking for his father to escape all responsibility for driving with a suspended license. Instead, he was making a nuanced argument about proportional justice, about the need for legal consequences to account for the motivations and circumstances behind violations. It was exactly the kind of thinking that exemplified restorative rather than purely punitive approaches to justice. "I've been thinking about what would be fair," Miguel continued, revealing that he had given considerable thought to alternative consequences that might better serve justice while acknowledging his father's technical violation. "Maybe instead of paying all that money, Daddy could do some work to help other people, like the community service that my teacher, Mrs. Johnson, told us about when we studied how people can help their neighborhoods." Judge Caprio was struck by Miguel's suggestion of community service as an alternative to financial penalties. The boy had intuitively understood something that criminal justice experts spent years studying: that meaningful service to the community could be more effective than fines in both holding offenders accountable and contributing positively to society. Miguel's idea demonstrated a natural understanding of restorative justice principles. Or maybe Daddy could teach other daddies about what to do when their kids get sick and they don't have a license, Miguel suggested, his innocent creativity revealing solutions that adult legal minds might never consider. Daddy learned a lot that night about how to get help from hospitals and police officers, and maybe he could share what he learned so other families wouldn't have to go through the same scary situation. The idea of turning Miguel's father's experience into an educational opportunity for other families was brilliant in its simplicity and effectiveness. Judge Caprio could see how such an approach would transform a negative legal experience into something positive that could benefit the entire community while allowing Miguel's father to maintain his dignity and contribute meaningfully to society. I also want to tell you something important about my daddy that I think you should know, Miguel said, his voice growing stronger as he prepared to share what was clearly a crucial part of his testimony. Even though Daddy got in trouble for driving, without a license, he's been trying really hard to fix all his problems so he can drive legally again. Judge Caprio nodded encouragingly, understanding that Miguel was about to provide character evidence for his father, testimony about the man's efforts to become compliant with legal requirements despite the obstacles he faced. This kind of information was often crucial in helping judges understand the full picture of a defendant's circumstances and commitment to following the law. Daddy has been going to driving classes every Saturday morning, even though that's the only day he doesn't have to work, and he could be sleeping late or playing with me and Sophia, Miguel explained, revealing his father's dedication to addressing the issues that had led to his license suspension. He also got a second job working nights so he can save money to pay for car insurance and all the fees he needs to get his license back. The sacrifices that Miguel described, giving up rest and family time to attend mandatory classes, working additional hours to meet financial obligations, painted a picture of a man who was taking serious steps to resolve his legal problems. Judge Caprio could see that Miguel's father wasn't someone who was carelessly ignoring legal requirements, but rather someone who was working systematically to regain compliance despite significant financial and time constraints. Mama says that Daddy is working so hard to fix everything that he's tired all the time, but he never complains because he says it's important for me and Sophia to see that when you make mistakes, you work hard to make them right, Miguel continued, revealing the positive parenting lessons that his father was teaching through his own behavior. Daddy always tells us that being responsible means accepting consequences but also working to be better. The values that Miguel attributed to his father impressed Judge Caprio deeply. Here was a man who was using his own legal troubles as teaching opportunities for his children, demonstrating through his actions that mistakes could be learning experiences, and that personal responsibility involved both accepting consequences and working toward improvement. But the biggest thing I want you to know about my daddy, Miguel said, his voice taking on an emotional intensity that commanded everyone's attention, is that he would do the same thing again if Sophia or I were sick and needed help. Not because he likes breaking rules, but because he loves us more than he's afraid of getting in trouble. The declaration hit Judge Caprio like a physical blow. Miguel had articulated something profound about the nature of parental love, the way that protective instinct transcends self-preservation and legal considerations when children are in danger. The boy's understanding of his father's priorities revealed the security and unconditional love that defined their family relationships. I know that some people might think Daddy should have called an ambulance instead of driving us to the hospital, Miguel continued, addressing the obvious alternative that critics might suggest. But ambulances cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and we don't have that much money. Also, Mama was so scared that night that I don't think she could have explained to the ambulance people what was wrong with Sophia, because when Mama gets really scared, she forgets how to speak English very well. The practical obstacles that Miguel described revealed the complex barriers that immigrant families often face in accessing emergency services. Language difficulties, financial constraints, and unfamiliarity with systems could create situations where driving to the hospital, even illegally, seemed like the most effective way to get immediate help for a sick child. Mr. Judge, I know I'm just a little kid, and maybe I don't understand everything about laws and rules, Miguel said, beginning to wrap up his testimony with the humility and respect that his grandmother had undoubtedly taught him was appropriate when addressing authority figures. But I do understand that my daddy is a good man who made a hard choice because he loves his family, and I'm hoping you might be able to help him in a way that the other judge couldn't. The contrast that Miguel drew between his current appeal and his father's previous court experience revealed his hope that different judges might approach similar situations with different perspectives. Judge Caprio understood that the boy was essentially asking for a fresh consideration of his father's case, hoping that a new set of eyes might see possibilities for mercy that had been overlooked before. "I brought something to show you," Miguel said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small, folded piece of paper. "This is a picture that Sophia drew of our family after she got better from being sick. She drew Daddy with a big smile because she said he was her hero for taking her to the hospital when she needed help." Miguel unfolded the paper to reveal a typical child's drawing. Stick figures in bright crayon colors representing his family members, with his father depicted as noticeably larger than the other figures and wearing what appeared to be a cape. The innocent artistry of a 3-year-old's grateful heart provided more powerful character testimony than any official document could have offered. "Sophia doesn't understand about licenses or courts or fines," Miguel explained, holding up his sister's drawing for Judge Caprio to see clearly. "She just knows that when she was scared and sick, Daddy made her feel safe and got her the help she needed. To Sophia, Daddy really is a superhero, and I think maybe the law should see him that way too." Judge Caprio sat in stunned silence for several long moments after Miguel finished speaking, the child's innocent drawing still held up for all to see. In 30 years of presiding over municipal court, the judge had never been more profoundly moved or more aware of the transformative power that children's perspectives could bring to even the most formal legal proceedings. Miguel's testimony had stripped away all the technical complexities of law enforcement and revealed the simple human truth at the heart of his father's case, that love for one's children can compel ordinary people to make extraordinary choices. When Judge Caprio finally found his voice, it was thick with emotion that he made no attempt to hide or control. "Miguel," he said, his words carrying the weight of someone who had been fundamentally changed by what he had just heard, "I want you to know that in all my years as a judge, no one has ever taught me more about what real justice looks like than you have today. You have shown me that sometimes the most important voices in a courtroom are the smallest ones, because children understand fairness in ways that adults sometimes forget." Miguel looked up at Judge Caprio with wide eyes, clearly not expecting such a response from the intimidating figure behind the big desk. The boy had come to court hoping to help his father, but he had no idea that his innocent words would have such a profound impact on someone he had been taught to view as one of the most powerful people in the community. "Your daddy is very lucky to have a son like you," Judge Caprio continued, his voice growing stronger as he found the words to express what Miguel's testimony had meant to him. "And Sophia is very lucky to have a big brother who understands that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they just love their families so much that they're willing to face any consequence to keep them safe." The courtroom had fallen into absolute silence as everyone present realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Other defendants, court staff, and observers had all stopped what they were doing to listen to this extraordinary exchange between a veteran judge and a 7-year-old boy whose courage and love had transformed a routine legal proceeding into a moment of profound human connection. "Miguel, I want you to go home and tell your daddy something very important for me," Judge Caprio said, standing up from his chair and walking around his desk to stand directly in front of the boy. "I want you to tell him that Judge Caprio says he is not just a good father. He is an exceptional father who made exactly the right choice on the night Sophia was sick." Miguel's face lit up with joy and relief as he heard Judge Caprio's words. The validation that the judge was providing wasn't just about legal mercy. It was about recognizing his father's character and affirming the values that guided their family's decisions. For a 7-year-old boy who had watched his father struggle, with guilt and worry about the legal consequences of saving his sister, Judge Caprio's words were like a miracle. "Furthermore," Judge Caprio continued, his voice taking on the formal authority of someone making an official judicial decision, "I am hereby directing that your father's case be transferred to my courtroom, and I am dismissing all fines and penalties associated with his citation. Your daddy will not pay 1 penny for doing what any loving parent would do in the same situation." The announcement created a wave of quiet applause throughout the courtroom, as everyone present understood. They had witnessed justice in its purest form. Judge Caprio had used his authority not just to show mercy, but to affirm that the legal system could recognize and honor the moral complexity of human situations when approached with wisdom and compassion. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. Reaching into his own wallet, he pulled out a business card and knelt down to Miguel's eye level, transforming himself from an intimidating authority figure into someone speaking directly to a courageous child. "Miguel, I want to give you this card with my personal phone number on it," he said, writing something on the back. "If your family ever faces another emergency situation, I want you to call me directly. No family should have to choose between following the law and protecting their children." The gesture was extraordinary in its personal nature, and its recognition that Miguel's family's struggles weren't unique, that countless families faced similar impossible choices when systems failed to account for emergency situations and economic realities. Judge Caprio was essentially providing a safety net that could prevent future legal crises for the Santos family. "I also want to tell you something about the drawing that Sophia made," Judge Caprio said, gently taking the colorful picture from Miguel's hands and studying it with the seriousness it deserved. "Sophia is absolutely right. Your daddy is a superhero. But do you know what makes him even more special than the superheroes in comic books?" Miguel shook his head, clearly fascinated by Judge Caprio's question and eager to hear the answer. "Real superheroes like your daddy don't have special powers that make them strong," Judge Caprio explained, his words carrying the wisdom of someone who had spent decades observing human courage in all its forms. "They get their strength from love, love for their families, love for their children, and love for doing what's right even when it's difficult or scary. That's the most powerful force in the world, and your daddy has it in abundance." The lesson that Judge Caprio was teaching Miguel about real heroism would stay with the boy for the rest of his life, shaping his understanding of courage, sacrifice, and the responsibilities that come with loving others. It was exactly the kind of moral education that children needed to develop into compassionate, principled adults. "Now, Miguel, I want you to do something very important for me," Judge Caprio said, his voice taking on the tone of someone giving a special mission to a trusted ally. "I want you to take this drawing home and hang it somewhere special where your whole family can see it every day. It should remind all of you that love and courage are more valuable than any amount of money, and that families who care for each other the way yours does are the real treasures in this world." Miguel nodded solemnly, understanding that Judge Caprio was giving him a responsibility that went beyond just delivering good news to his family. He was being asked to help his family remember their own worth and strength, to celebrate the values that had guided them through their crisis, and to take pride in the love that had brought him to court that day. "Before you leave here today, I want everyone in this courtroom to understand something important," Judge Caprio said, turning to address the broader audience that had witnessed Miguel's testimony. "This young man has reminded us all that justice isn't just about applying rules. It's about understanding people, recognizing love when we see it, and making decisions that honor both the law and the human spirit." Judge Caprio's words challenged everyone present to think differently about their own roles in creating a more just and compassionate society. Miguel's courage in speaking up for his father had created an opportunity for broader reflection on how communities could better support families facing crisis situations. "Miguel Santos," Judge Caprio said, extending his hand for a formal handshake, "you have done something today that most adults never accomplish. You have made the justice system more just, more compassionate, and more worthy of the trust that families like yours place in it. Your father should be proud of you, your sister should be proud of you, and your community should be proud of you." As Miguel shook Judge Caprio's hand with the serious dignity of someone who understood the importance of the moment, everyone in the courtroom could see that something transformative had occurred. A 7-year-old boy's love for his family had reminded a veteran judge why he had become a judge in the first place, and his innocent faith in fairness had created a moment of perfect justice that would be remembered and shared for years to come. "Go home now, Miguel," Judge Caprio said gently, "and tell your daddy that Judge Caprio says he is a hero. Tell Sophia that her drawing is absolutely beautiful and absolutely true, and tell your mama that she is raising two of the most remarkable children I have ever had the privilege to meet." As Miguel walked out of the courtroom that day, clutching his sister's drawing and Judge Caprio's business card, he carried with him not just good news for his family, but a lesson about the power of courage, love, and speaking up for what's right. And Judge Caprio would carry Miguel's story with him for the rest of his career, a reminder that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes from the most unexpected sources, and that true justice always has room for the innocent perspective of a child who understands that heroes are simply people who love enough to do whatever it takes to protect the people who matter most to them.